Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Alice Wilkerson, Executive Director of Strong Future Maryland, and we are really excited to be sponsoring this event tonight. Before we get started, I want to take a quick moment to thank my coworker, Maya Holiday, for all of her hard work to help make this event possible, from organizing our great panels tonight and on Saturday, to running our social media, and even managing the event tonight, helping us get live and making sure that everything is happening the way it should be. We couldn't do this without her. I also want to thank our intern, Ellie Gustafson, who's been interning with us for over a year and has helped us organize this event, among many other great things she's been helping us with. And our co-sponsors, Delegate Brooke Learman, who is also running for comptroller and currently the only woman running for statewide office, Delegate Mark Corman, Senator Will Smith, who is with us tonight, John King for governor, the State Innovation Exchange, Maryland Center for Economic Policy, the Maryland chapter of the Sierra Club, Chesapeake Climate Action Network, Martina Hazelton, March for Our Lives Maryland, and HeartSmiles Maryland. Thank you so much for showing up to support young people in advocacy and to support all of the young people on our panelists tonight and on Saturday. And to our co-hosts, The Race Thing, and Community and Law in Action. Thank you for partnering with us to make this happen. If everyone could take a quick moment to just introduce yourselves in the chat, say hello, let us know that you're here. And then after that, we're just going to ask if you could hold questions and comments until after the panels are done. And we open things up for questions at the end. If you have questions or comments during the event, please feel free to just DM me. But we want to keep the chatter down in the comments so that we can focus on what the panelists are saying. Tonight, we're kicking off our youth forum, which we are calling Speak to Power. This is a conversation about power, and hopefully those with power are listening. We are also building power during these 3 sessions, specifically youth power. At the end of this forum, we will identify specific actions that our elected officials and advocacy community can take to support youth advocates, as well as actions young people can take to get involved, to stay involved, and to be supported in the advocacy that they're doing. There is so much that is happening in the world, in the country, in our state, and in our communities. And it's often hard to know where to start, and at times it can really be overwhelming. We will end each of our panels by asking what gives our panelists hope or keeps them motivated in the work that they're doing. But I want to sort of say, I'm motivated to build a better future. And what gives me hope is the energy and the unapologetic activism that I'm seeing from younger generations. But at the same time, I don't take that for granted because you all really don't have a choice. Sorry, I don't want to take it for granted because younger generations really don't have a choice. You're really fighting to have a future to begin with. So it's my obligation to work for that future, for myself, for you, for my kids, and to ensure that there's a livable future at all for any of us. And the least that I can do or anyone else can do is really give young people a seat at the table and share power to help mitigate the enormous current and future challenges that we are all facing that are really the direct result of the mistakes made by past generations. I hope everyone attending tonight will actively listen to our panelists.
A series of photos I was doing.
And now I'd like to introduce our moderators. Tori Paxton and Heena Paracha are the hosts of The Race Thing, a media company focused on the education and impact of systemic racism on the Eastern Shore. Tori and Heena have interviewed activists, policymakers, and community members by isolating race in their discussions. Their goal is to amplify and share the stories of individuals of color who have been ignored and dehumanized for far too long. Tori and Heena, thank you so much for moderating tonight's conversation, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Alice. I'm going to thank everyone on the panel for joining in and consistently working towards building a better future for all of us by advocating and sharing their voices. Thank you, CLIA and Strong Future Maryland, for having this platform. These discussions are extremely important so that youth can feel empowered in sharing their voices. And I hope that there are some older people who are listening currently who do take up those spaces where decisions are made, and they can also take up some notes of what our youth needs, basically, to have a stronger future. With that being said, let's get into the discussion. I would like everyone who is on the panel to introduce themselves as I take their names. So I'm going to start with Isra. Isra, if you would introduce yourself with a brief introduction of what you do.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Isra Qadri. My preferred pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am a student in Montgomery County Public Schools, but I'm also one of the state directors for March for Our Lives Maryland, which focuses on gun violence prevention in Maryland.
Okay. And then Noureen.
Thank you. My name is Noureen Badwi. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a student at Georgetown University, and I'm coming to you all as president of the Young Democrats of Maryland. I'm thrilled to be here, and thank you guys, and Strong Future Maryland, for putting on this event.
Thank you for joining us. And then Roman.
Hey everyone, I'm Roman. I'm 16. I go by he, him, and I'm also a student in MCPS. I'm here with Civics Unplugged, which is a social enterprise dedicated to empowering Gen Z leaders to build a better future for humanity. And so I'm super excited to be here and to talk about the importance of youth leaders.
Thank you. And then Sarah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Fishkind. I use she, her pronouns. I am a student at Towson University, and I've done work with March for Our Lives in the past, and I am also a co-founder of HoCo for Justice.
And then lastly, Gemma.
Hey everybody, my name is Gemma Chester. I'm 16 years old. I'm a junior at the Baltimore Polytechnic Institute. I'm a youth advocate and leader here representing HeartSmiles MD as well as the Healing Youth Alliance. The Healing Youth Alliance is a youth-led mental health organization, which I'm proud to be a part of the second cohort. And HeartSmiles MD is a youth program that is just dedicated to creating more youth leaders and teaching youth the things they need to know going inside the real world.
Thank you all. Now, we know that these voices that we are going to hear today are not new. We've had youth advocates since the beginning of America, but we do see that there are some struggles with being heard or being listened to when it comes to youth advocacy. So with that being said, even though there's political engagement from youth, it is not unique to this generation, like I said earlier, and youth feeling like their advocacy and voices aren't taken seriously isn't new either. But it does feel as though there's more at stake for young people than ever before, especially with what's happening with the climate and the social situations that we're coming to deal with as racism becomes bigger and bigger issues as we go into the future. So Noureen, I'm going to direct this question to you. What do you think the role of youth voices in politics and advocacy should be, and why do you do this work?
Thank you so much. So I guess starting off with why I do this work, it's generally very simple in the way that I tend to think about it. So I have this fundamental belief that government can make people's lives better. I think everything that, are involved in our lives, a lot of the things that we take for granted or things that we're consciously very grateful for can be led back to some type of governmental policy, some type of social justice initiative, some era of our country that was really purposed towards making this country better for each and every one of us. I think when we think about the history of our country and how politics plays a role in that, how changing, policies and changing, how our government works is the role of that. It's important that we recognize that not everyone had an equal playing field. And I think when we think about young voices, we can think about it in a lot of, other marginalized voices. So for example, people of color were not always at the table in policy discussions in America. They were not always treated as equal. And essentially they were marginalized, and no one puts themselves in a marginalizing position. You have a position of authority or place of power that marginalizes that group of people. And I think young people are the same way. I think it's interesting as well that you had mentioned how we've had young people involved since, the beginning of our country. Of over a dozen founding fathers were under the age of 35, which, the bracket for Young Dems of Maryland, which I preside over, is under 35. So you've had a lot of young people at the table. The issue is there's been, through generations, the emergence of ageism, which has really tried to marginalize those voices. And I think what's important in terms of, what an ideal position for young people needs to be in policy discussions is an equal to other people at the table. So like in high school, for example, I served as the state student member of the board, where I had, equal vote equal position on the Board of Education, was able to enact policies that better reflected my constituency and really fight for that missing voice at the table. And I think, you know, if we really want to have ideal policy, if we want to have social justice, we have to look at everything through that lens of equity, through the lens of marginalization, and see the people who have historically not been put into the table, and also the people who, policy discussions about them need to be, and you really need to centralize around the people being affected by that. So in general, I really think we need to be equal partners in the work that we do. And I think in general, I'm really aspired to be part of Generation Z, where we grew up in a generation that was really focused on social justice. Think about March for Our Lives, and we have that represented here today. We have other initiatives where people, we had walkouts throughout high school and people really involved in social justice. It wasn't like other generations in like the 70s and 80s, they were really focused on, booming Wall Street and how do we make money. Gen Z really woke up, and it was a generation of how do we make social change. And so I think being able to really change how we do things nowadays and how policy leaders today impact the way that we can bring young people, and I think investing in the next generation will be really crucial in making a country that works for all of us, including our youngest members as well. So those are my takeaways.
Thank you so much, Noureen. That was very insightful. I do see that even though like we clearly represent a lot of advocacy areas, right? Like what youth does represent a lot of that area where they speak up and they say what they have to say, and try to make change by, like you said, protest, showing up, doing all these things. But what I want to know, Gemma, if you would go into this a little bit, what do you feel as though is the biggest challenge or a barrier that you face as a youth advocate?
Thank you. So definitely one of the biggest challenges that I face like almost all the time is that when people hear me like say my age and just like where I'm from, they kind of just like automatically like start forming these ideas about what I'm gonna say or how I'm gonna say certain things. So definitely being African American, being young, living in Baltimore City, people already have this perception of me and how I think. So when they hear it and my reputation and all the organizations and officials that I work with, they're kind of just like, oh, okay, maybe we can start to take her serious. So definitely one of the biggest challenges I face is just not youth advice or youth point of view. So that's definitely just one of the challenging things, but it's something I'm probably always gonna have to face. So just pushing through it, making sure that I'm getting myself out there and letting them know like there are other people just like me that are from where I'm from, and that we all have a strong opinion and all have something to say, and that what we say really does matter, and that we think about these things that affect us, and when we're given a platform that we absolutely take the full opportunity.
Now, you did mention that there are times where people listen to you and then they come to a realization that you do have a lot to say and that you have a lot of useful things to say. But do you think that sometimes when you're working with elected officials or any kind of older advocates, that even though they might have good intentions or they were trying to be supportive, but they were actually doing the opposite?
Yeah, definitely. So being asked to like come and speak at places or to just offer my opinion during a meeting or like a session, maybe with like city schools or something like that, I'm just in the meeting with them and they're going about their meeting and I can chime in whenever I want. It's kind of just like they listen to what I say, but don't actually take it into consideration. And it's like, I see like the step towards, trying to include youth, but not really including them. So yes, I'm at the meetings or they have youth inclusion saying it, like in the agenda, or they're putting it on a flyer saying, oh yeah, youth will be there and this and that. But are they really taking what we said at those meetings, not even just into consideration? Because it's affecting us and you're asking for our opinion and then you just kind of like hear it and don't actually listen to what we said and actually take action on that and take our advice like word for word. So sometimes it definitely is frustrating, but I have to remember that there are people out there, especially like the organizations that I work with, that when we say something, they make it happen and that they actually care about how we feel and show that empathy towards us and don't just be like, oh, y'all young and what y'all have to say. Y'all haven't experienced anything like that. So what y'all had to say may be important, you know, later on when y'all gain some years under y'all belt. But right now, we just gonna, you know, sweep it under the rug. So just making sure that I continue to use my voice and encourage others to speak out when they can is really important.
Thank you so much, Gemma. I think I agree so much with you about empathy, right? Like if we don't have empathy in the spaces that we create, then a lot of times we miss the listening piece. We miss the very important issues that need to be listened to from a space of empathy, because not everything is, you know, written in results. Like everything cannot be quantified. It has to be determined by how it's affecting human life by their you know, qualitative or experiential stories. So with that being said, I do want to talk a little bit about sharing power with youth. Listening to youth voices is important, but it seems like the least we can do. Sarah, would you talk a little bit about what does it mean to share power with youth? And have you had any experiences with gatekeeping where you were asked to participate but weren't included in decision making?
Yeah, I would say sharing power with youth starts with sharing power with all youth, no matter their age, whether or not they can vote. I think it's an important emphasis to understand that not all youth can vote, obviously, but I think we still have to listen to them because these issues like gun violence, climate change, and many others affect us and are going to affect our future and depend on whether or not we have a future in general. We all have different stories and experiences and walks of life, and it is important to recognize that everyone's stories are different and everyone has different opinions on things. And I certainly do have experiences of gatekeeping. I think honestly, it's been more with politicians. I've been in their offices, and when I state my age, which I'm 20 right now, but more so when I was a teenager, they would kind of just put their head down, not listen as much, and just not pay attention just because of my age or talking over me or, you know, saying that my experiences aren't valid. And that goes with my friends as well and their experiences that I saw at that same time. Yeah.
We've heard a lot of talk about politicians, as you said, Sarah, making assumptions, right, for what the youth needs. Or, well, what do the youth truly need, but not really having conversations with youth. Or when they bring youth to the table, there's not a lot of, like Gemma was stating earlier, it's a lot of performances that are going on. With that in mind, Isra, I'm gonna direct this question directly towards you. How do you feel like needs differ between high school and college age advocates?
Yeah, so I'm still in high school and all of my experience has been in high school. And so maybe I'm biased towards people who are a bit younger, but I definitely think that those of us who lack a lot of like the logistical arrangements are very undervalued and underrepresented when it comes to advocacy and in general. I just think that a lot of the time we are looked over and we're immediately dismissed because maybe we can't vote or because we can't immediately come to some type of meeting on the spot. And I think that severely leads to us not being heard from enough or not being valued enough when it comes to legislators and adults in general. And of course, I understand that obviously college students tend to have more control over their own schedule, or they have some of the more access to resources as adults, but I don't think that should put them above high schoolers and above our needs, because at the end of the day, we are all young people who are being impacted by the decisions that are currently being made, and all of our futures are at stake. And so I've definitely just seen a lot more emphasis on activities or events that require kind of immediate attention, and that I know for a fact high schoolers like myself cannot necessarily direct all of our attention to. I do think that COVID and just my accessibility to technology and a lot of other people's accessibility to technology has made that easier for us. I've seen a lot more interaction from students who I'd never heard from before because they were able to just pull up their computer or their phone and get on a call, or send something over or research something really quickly. So I think utilizing technology as people have been learning to do so more often is definitely a big factor and can kind of bridge that gap between those of us who have access to a car or resources or adult stuff and those of us who don't.
Thank you so much for answering that for me, Isra. Sarah, as a college student, how do you feel on your end of things?
Yeah, so I got the experience of both being a high school student and college student in or the organizing space. And I'd say it's different, like Isra was saying. There's definitely more resources, more, my schedule can be more flexible, but at the same time, we have a lot of readings, a lot of papers, and a lot of stuff to do. And sometimes it just doesn't feel like we have time to do everything unless we want to be completely burnt out. But I also do enjoy that we're able to pick our major in our classes. So we're able to kind of learn about the things that we are taking action on and learn about different movements that can inspire us to do different types of actions and think of different legislation that we might want to support and really broaden our knowledge as to why we're still in this movement and the work we still have to do.
Thank you so much for answering that for me, Sarah. In our prep session, we had a conversation about transportation. Do we feel like that is an issue with access of transportation for our students?
I mean, I definitely agree. I talked about this a lot, but even as a high schooler, our Board of Education in Montgomery County is closely located to a specific high school. And so you tend to see a lot of students who come to testify, who come to talk to legislators from that specific high school. And you don't even see the incredible diversity of our students across dozens of schools represented within our own school system. So I think simple things like that on even the local level pose a really big challenge, especially when, like me, you have two working parents who aren't really able to take you places or use a car all the time. I definitely think that it poses a really big barrier. But like I said before, the utilization of technology in so many different areas and so many different platforms really opens up that opportunity to students who don't have the advantage of being able to go somewhere at the drop of a hat.
Thank you so much. I know access to transportation is a big issue, and I'm glad to see that there are going to be certain organizations and technology that is making that an actual mission that they're trying to go ahead and solve. I know that several of you have worked as interns for elected officials or advocates. Was it a rewarding experience, and did you feel like you had power to contribute? Were you valued? Roman, let's have you answer this one for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. So this summer, I actually interned for Jamie Raskin's campaign, not directly through it, but through the Democracy Summer Program. And as a quick preface, the Democracy Summer Program is this really, really big program now. I think we had 500 or 600 fellows. And essentially it's young people from all over the country, both high schoolers and college students, who come together and work with local campaigns. There is a lot of resources dedicated to the Jamie Raskin campaign, but there's also spread out throughout the entire country with a lot of other great politicians. I think my experience was actually very excellent, which is not something you typically hear when you hear about young people working with elected officials. So I wanted to talk about just a little bit why this experience was so good. First of all, one of the things that it provided was many, many resources. The program was virtual, which I think did make it a little worse for the user experience. That said, I think it would have been more engaging in person. That said, it really opened the diversity and allowed many, many people from all over the country to get involved and participate. But the two biggest resources I think that it provided were education and transportation. So for the shorter one, transportation, while it didn't directly provide transportation, it did provide a lot of carpooling opportunities and organization to make sure that people could get onto, on-site events, right? Whether it was canvassing or, speaking with local people, everything like that. The second thing that it did really well was education. And this is a little bit like Sarah was saying. When you're in high school, you are forced to take a lot of classes that frankly do not interest you. Today, I sat down in my physics class and I sort of tuned out because I really don't believe that we should be forced to take classes that we don't really want to put any attention to. And so that's something that I think is done a lot better in college. And what you lose on when you're forced to sit in a physics classroom, for example, for 45 minutes is you lose education that really matters to you. And so through the Democracy Summer Program, we were able to sit down with people of all ages, with all professions, and really discuss some very interesting topics on things that we wouldn't learn about at all in school. This year, we focused on voting rights, but we heard a lot about feminism, about the rise of autocracies, and just a whole lot of other issues, which, again, we don't learn about in school. So those two resources, the transportation and the education, were hugely, hugely critical. I think another thing that it did very well was it gave everyone an opportunity to really put in as much as they were able to and to receive a lot from that. I really felt like no matter how much I contributed, I was getting a lot out of it. And the more I contributed, the more I was able to really have power to make decisions, to campaign, and to really get involved. And I think, from teaching us how to phone bank, to Canvas, to letter writing, there were so many opportunities in the program to get involved with the campaign. And I think it gave everyone an excellent base. And I think you've seen that people who really got involved in Democracy Summer ended up working with local campaigns afterwards and really getting involved because they were given such a broad base of skills that are so important. And so I think the Democracy Summer Program really worked because it was very meritocratic. It allowed basically anyone who was interested to get involved, and it gave them many opportunities to not only just be there sitting in a Zoom, but also really get involved and work on the local level. And I think it provided resources that facilitated that and made that a possibility.
Thank you so much for answering that for me, Roman. So it sounds like there needs to be more of a focus on the issues and the subjects that we're actually passionate about, right? Sarah, is there anything more that you wanted to add on to that?
Sure. When Roman was saying that, I was thinking about my high school experience and the math classes I had to take and different classes I had to take, and the fact that I had one government class, and at that time I wasn't even that interested in government. So it's just really interesting how different it is. I only had to take like one math class in college, and just for like the core stuff. But it's definitely really beneficial. And I agree with Roman that it's really hard not to take classes that you're interested in. It makes school, dreadful or boring, or feels like you're wasting time in a way. So I am grateful for college classes, and I do think we need more civics classes and more of a choice in our high school. I know we also did have 2 classes, African American Studies and Women's Studies, at my high school, and it was only for a limited amount of students. I remember in my Women's Studies class, it was only females and a couple men. So it was like also just an interesting dynamic. And they only lasted for 1 semester, so it was also very limited. We didn't have an official textbook for our African American Studies class because it wasn't taken that often. So it's just difficult to go through high school not learning the things you want to learn.
Wow. Thank you so much for answering that for me, Sarah. In our initial conversation with young activists about this forum, many of them talked about a lack of financial resources or other support being a humongous barrier. Is this something that you've ever encountered, and what should this kind of support look like?
Yeah, for sure. So during my experience with Democracy Summer, we did receive a stipend. It was less than I think it was in other years, but of course, that was because transportation costs were generally lower since we were online on most days. But I think absolutely, in any work that young people do, especially when it's such consequential work, like working in local campaigns and really getting to meet people. And I think both Gen Z and the people running these campaigns, the people behind these campaigns, the politicians, running, have a stake in paying the people who work for them, especially if those are Gen Z, right? When you are hiring interns to campaign for you, you want to make sure that they're actually presenting a good view of you, right? Because they're the ones meeting, on most days with local people, the people who are going to vote for you. And I think there's a very important part in making sure that the people who are working for you are paid, not only because I feel like that's a basic, human right, and that's basic decency to be able to get financial sort of compensation for the work that you put in, but also because, for quality assurance, right? It's the same reason that any company pays employees that present their image to the world. And again, in the Democracy Summer Program, we were given stipends. We weren't, I think for the hours we put in, it wasn't exactly minimum wage, but it was definitely a sizable stipend, which I think covered for a lot of the opportunity costs. Obviously, during the summer, people are traveling and a lot of people have to end up working jobs during the summer. And so instead, instead of working a job at like a service place that you really aren't interested in, you could work in a local campaign and make around the same amount of money. So I think it's incredibly important that we pay the Gen Z interns and young people who are working in campaigns, because they're really the ones putting their heart out there. And I think we definitely owe them something. I know, though, that this can be quite an investment, right? Especially in a program like Democracy Summer, where everyone was given a stipend, regardless of how much work they put in. It's definitely a cost for the campaign. But again, I think it's an investment that is incredibly worthy, right? It's not just money that's going on a spreadsheet, right? Money going out. It's an investment in our future, right? And I think if we're able to provide these programs and we're able to really cultivate these incredibly important leadership skills in our in Gen Z leaders and provide them financial backing to cover for opportunity costs and to cover for anything else, right? Transportation costs, things like that. I think we're making an incredible investment in our future. And I think just like you put a mortgage on a house, I think that you should be paying your interns that are working for you and that are working for a better future.
Thank you so much, Roman, for answering that. Sarah, I also want to hear from you. And I also want to add, where do you think it should come from?
Yeah, so I completely agree with Roman on the money side of things, but I think support's really interesting for young people. It sometimes feels a little performative. I think someone said this in the panel. People are like, there's going to be so many youth here, blah, blah, blah. And then essentially they don't listen to our voices, or they don't actually do what we tell them to do. I also noticed a lot with HoCo for Justice that we were lucky to get a lot of donations before and during our big march. But then afterwards, the support was not there. After the movement, quote unquote, dies down, which it never really does. The news and media just stops paying attention to it, or the people just stop paying attention to it because they think one march is enough and whatnot. So we lost a lot of that support and momentum. And I think that, again, the money issue has a lot to do with burnout in the way that we're expected to kind of do all of this as almost a full-time job, sometimes as a part-time job, and not get paid. And we still have the schoolwork and we still have our own jobs because, money is essential as a college student, as a high school student, under the system we currently are operating under. So it's just the support there's a lack of support often that I've noticed and experienced.
Thank you so much for that. Noureen, I had a question for you. A lot of this discussion is focused on what people could improve about, what there's lacking essentially in not being heard, or not being listened to, or not being fiscally or financially supported. But what are some things that you've noticed that were positive experiences when you've advocated and there have been policymakers who have supported you in certain ways that were useful and effective?
Thank you so much. I think a big part of it is you have to look at young people as value. And I think young people can tell when you don't think of them as some type of value add. When you're putting them in unpaid internships. I know in high school, I interned on Capitol Hill. There were 7 other interns in our office. I was the only woman. I'm also Egyptian, so I was the only woman of color. It was the only one, commuting from Baltimore every day, had to like find, out of nowhere how to pay for gas, to do all this stuff. And I think if you see young people and the work that they produce as value, you would treat them as such in terms of the input they provide, the work that they do financially, ensure that they have the resources to be successful with transportation. So things to sort of level the playing field of equity with young people is how positive experience that I've had in advocacy and later in life getting jobs that gave me fair compensation, getting the opportunities to do things I otherwise wouldn't have been able to in high school. One of my most positive experiences in advocacy actually was my first experience in advocacy. Back in middle school, I remember I spent, like, this is a side tangent, but I had spent like all weekend trying to find shorts that were long enough so I wouldn't get dress coded. In middle school, I was 5'8". I haven't gotten any taller. I was very, very tall growing up. And I have very long arms. My wingspan is 6'8" because I have a genetic disorder. It's very insecure about this because the dress code was that when you put your when you put your hands to your knees, you couldn't have shorts that go past your fingertips. And my fingertips went to my knees. So I couldn't find any shorts, right, that would fit, that would work. I wear the shorts for the first day. I'm like super worried. I get dress coded and like in a very misogynistic way. And I was like, this is very wrong. And so I meet with the principal and I'm like, look, this dress code, it mentions bra strap showing, says that girls can't have shorts that are too short. That this is to prevent people from not being able to, prevent, generally men from not being able to pay attention in class. And I said, we can't have this being targeted towards women. Not only does it really alienate our young people and our women, it's just a big issue. So I remember I put together this group of people, so it was like 7th grade, and we changed the dress code. They let us write it ourselves. They let us, impact how it was influenced. We talked to teachers about how things would do. And like, since then, that dress code in the middle school is the one that we had written based off of that negative experience. And if you look at a lot of other policies, they sort of started from that anger where you came and you say, this is wrong, this needs to change. And they listened to you and they let it happen. And it wasn't like, okay, we'll change it on our own. They gave us the authority and the value to go ahead and do it ourselves and come up with a policy that we believed was correct. And they adopted it, right? And so I think things like that, where you really take the time to listen to people, to really sympathize with them, to understand where they're coming from, and to sort of have that level of empathy and understanding, I think is really crucial in how we treat young people. I think it's really important in this day and age that politicians and people in positions of power don't look at young people as some type of photo op. We have a lot of value that we provide to positions, and we have a lot of value that we can bring to the table, especially based on our own lived experiences. Even on the State Board of Education, I remember millions of times where, I was educating my colleagues about how these policies actually worked in schools and what they actually were and what it looked like when the rubber hit the road. I know there were the votes that we took that were pretty big votes, and I was able to convince people to vote this way or that way, to limit standardized testing, to show them the negative influences based on the experiences that I had every day. And that's not something that older folks have, especially in schools when you're looking at student advocacy. So I think the most crucial part of positive experiences is you really have to look at young people as a value add and really be open-minded enough to realize that young people can bring a lot to the table. You shouldn't go into it thinking what do these 14-year-olds really know that I don't, because you would be very surprised, especially our politicians would be very surprised about what they can bring to the table. So I think it's an aspect of humility, it's an aspect of empathy, and again, making sure that you look at young people as valuable.
Thank you so much for answering that, Noureen. I hope everyone tonight was really listening to your response to that question. But Gemma, I want to ask you, what's one thing you want elected officials and older advocates to know about youth advocacy or do differently?
So to put it simply, just to really take into consideration what we say and not to sweep it under the rug. Really think about what we're saying and how we're saying it, and take our experiences and the stories that we tell, and try to put yourself in our shoes and think about the positions that we were put in as youth and the policies and things that affect us, and how you as a policymaker or politician can change that in your position. So I think them really realizing their position and how much power they hold over the things that affect us is important, and that hearing from us can really help them make things better. So that's what I would say.
Thank you so much. Sarah, I'm gonna ask you the same question, and we're just gonna go straight down the line.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
No problem, I sure can. I said, what's one thing you want elected officials and older advocates to know about youth advocacy or do differently?
Yeah, I think just taking this more seriously and understanding that we don't have a choice to do this. We understand that our lives are at stake and that climate change is an issue that's affecting us right now. If you look at what has been happening in New Jersey, New York, and different forest fires in California, so many people are being displaced already, and it's only scary how much longer that's going to take for it to get worse. But I'm not going to go on a rant about climate change. So yeah, just like understanding and caring about us more, and at least listening to us and putting actions where your words are.
Thank you. Look, I was about to tell you go off, but I know we don't have enough time. Roman, same question. If you need me to repeat it, I can.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think the most important thing that I want the older generation to know is to actually remember what it was like to be young. I think a lot of the older generation now grew up in the 60s and the 70s, which were definitely advocate heavy times. And I want anyone listening to sort of remember what it was like to be young and what it was like to put your voice out there. Because the truth is that the movements that we build, they exist, they're here, and they're here to stay. And I think one of the important considerations when you put yourself back into the shoes of someone who's young is that this isn't necessarily a fight for power, right? We aren't saying take out everyone who's over the age of 60, take them out of Congress, and only elect younger people. I think one of the important things that we're lacking is an intergenerational communication. I think when you look at the founding in this country, you had people like Benjamin Franklin, who was well into his 60s, working alongside people like Hamilton, who was, just turning 20. And so what I sort of hope that the older generation realizes is that many of us want to build a constructive dialogue, and many of us want to make sure that our movements aren't being made diminutive by the movements that exist in older generations, and that we want to truly have this discussion, because we realize that right now the majority of people who are in power are the older generation. And though I believe that there needs to be more young people in power, I think the way to access that is to have those communications and to have that discussion. And I think a really great thing that we've done at Civics Unplugged is we've tried to bolster Gen Z leaders, but not just by pushing on the Gen Z end, but by trying to get the older generation, which makes up a lot of our donors and a lot of our supporters, and really build that intergenerational dialogue and start building on that work. And I think through that, bringing back to my first point, a lot of the older generation has been reminded of what it was like to be young. And I think when we all sort of try to put ourselves in these same shoes, I think it's hard for us to put ourselves in the shoes of an older generation. We haven't lived that. But I think for someone who's older, you have been young. And so I think that being able to empathize with one another and being able to sort of sit on the same standing really helps the intergenerational dialogue, which I think will create a smooth flow of generation to generation.
Thank you so much, Roman. Noureen?
Sure. I think a big part of it is if we agree with elected officials that there are problems in our society, there are problems with our education, there are problems in government. And if you are so desperate to solve those problems for your constituents, then understand that there are a lot of places where those solutions can come from, and you can be surprised where those solutions can come from. And be open-minded to those. I think some of the best elected officials that I've met, that I've interacted with, are ones that do more listening than they do speaking. And I think if you're really eager to get to those solutions, you would be surprised the amount of 14, 15, 16-year-olds and younger that can give you ideas that you and your staff haven't thought about. And if you really take the time to engage with them, to listen to them, to empower them, give them places where they can be comfortable speaking to you, again, you would be really surprised the value add that they can add to the work that you're doing to fight for your constituents, and to the work that we're all doing in sort of our pursuit of social justice and greater equity in our communities.
Thank you so much, Noureen. And Isra?
I definitely echo the sentiments of everything that everyone else said. And I'll be pretty blunt with what I'm going to say, but I honestly think that adults and legislators need to stop being so patronizing all of the time. If I had a nickel for every time I've heard, "You're so brave for doing this, you're so smart for doing this, thank you for going out of your way, we failed you," I would be the next Jeff Bezos, because I heard that way too many times, and I don't really think it does anything. If anything, it makes me annoyed because you're not the first person to think that, you won't be the last person to think that. I need you to start listening to me before you start over apologizing and taking up all of our conversation time apologizing for what you've done. And I think the way that that can be solved is just by having them reach out to us instead of having us to do all the work and expecting us to make all of the strides, because we are the future vote. We are your future support, and the ones that currently are making strides towards changing our current political and social landscape. And so I think if you are expecting us to do all of the work, then you can very soon expect to lose your power. And I think that really they just need to be the ones taking initiative instead of relying on us to do everything for them and expect the status quo to continue.
So well said, Isra. So I'm going to direct a question back at you just based off of that answer. So it seems that this work is extremely hard, right? Like we can all agree that being advocates, constantly yelling and screaming and asking for things that you would think are basic needs and would be met easily, but they're not. And we are patronized in a lot of ways. And we do realize that there's not a lot of financial support with it either, or that our policies aren't always been adopted. Noureen, you mentioned that there were some policies that were adopted at some point when you advocated for yourself and for your little community that you wanted to help, but that doesn't always happen. Those are like one of our outliers, right? And so what gives every one of you hope? And I'm going to go down the line and ask each and every one of you this, because I really want to know what motivates you and keeps you going and what gives you hope. Isra, starting with you.
Yeah, so obviously there's a lot of discouraging things that occur, but there are also a lot of great things that keep us going. And there's two major things that I think of. One is the most obvious, the most evident, and that's like any time that something that you've advocated for or worked on is seen being implemented or being changed. The first time this happened to me, I was lobbying for DC statehood. And then a few weeks later, it passed in the House. And I know that it passes multiple times in the House and it doesn't really get anywhere, but kind of just that feeling of hearing that news and knowing that even if you did some small thing, you met with a few staffers, not even like the congressman, that you had some type of impact and some type of stake in that situation and you were able to make something happen. And so that's kind of the most obvious thing, but I also think just as an organizer, being able to bring other people into the movement that you're working on, or giving other people the resources that they need to get involved for the very first time, especially with like, again, with like online platforms. I've sent out so many signups and so many Zoom links, and every time that I see like a new name that I don't recognize, it makes me really, really happy and really, really hopeful that we're just spreading kind of the ability to get involved and make pressure and put pressure on our elected officials to do something, because more people are gaining access to the information that they need in order to make substantive change. So those are kind of the two major things that really keep me going.
I love that. There's a lot of power in unity. Gemma, what would you say to that?
So it's definitely a lot of things, but definitely seeing other youth thrive off of things that I know I've helped change for the better is also really motivating. So with the Healing Youth Alliance, being a part of the second cohort, the first cohort and our cohort, we had to come together and, like, give feedback and basically really dig deep into our experiences and how we can make it better for the third cohort that was coming up. So now with that in place, just talking to the third cohort, which some of them are even my friends, or just checking back in with them and knowing that their experience is a little bit better than mine, and that they're really grasping the concept of mental health and the history of generational curses and all of these things, that it just it just makes me really happy. So definitely seeing that is really motivating and hopeful. Just seeing the impact that I've had on people's lives from just giving my input or sharing my opinions, knowing that I'm putting out relatable things. So when people are, like in the chat or they email me and say, I related so much, I actually share a similar experience. Thank you for using your voice to represent me. So knowing that I'm representing people who don't even know that I'm representing them, or they do, is always really confident and motivating. So also hearing from other youth that I'm doing things that are good is just always motivating. So definitely like that peer-to-peer contact and like support is what really motivates me.
That was profound. It is definitely, one of the most motivating factors to know that the impact that you're trying to make is actually, has an effective way of getting to people. And that is very, very profound. And you also mentioned, just getting feedback and having that sense of community by hearing that feedback as well. Roman, what would you say to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that ends up being most impactful for me is seeing how quickly the world around us is moving, and compared to that, how slowly government is moving, and how our work sort of tries to accelerate it. I think right now the world is on a sprint, but governments are like wearing 20-pound shoes on your feet, right? They're slowing us down. And I think there's obviously some support from the design of governments to, sort of encourage that. But at the same time, I think governments are working too slowly right now. And often they are the ones trying to slow down society, trying to slow down different sectors of our economy, when I think really it should be our job to speed them up. And I think one of the major ways that we do that is by defying expectations of what Gen Z can really be. I think you look back, 6-7 years ago, climate change was something that was still sort of this mystical sort of thing that nobody really talked about. And if it was addressed, it was addressed very lightly. And I think it's because of so many Gen Z movements, Gen Z voices, obviously people like Greta and the Sunrise Movement and just so many other Gen Z advocates that got up and said, look, this is an important issue and this is something that is going to be hugely consequential if we don't do anything about it. I think that really shifted the narrative. And I think we've been able to defy expectations of what young people can do. We've been able to, pull ourselves up and go, beyond what many expected of us. I think, unfortunately, what happens, though, is that despite defying these expectations, stuff is still moving slowly, right? We've been, I feel like a lot of politicians recognize that climate change is hugely important. Okay, where are the climate change deals? Why are they not passing, right? Why are they not being implemented? And I think that, again, is because government is so slow. So what gives me hope is that our movements and really by the work that we're doing, defying expectations, is hopefully accelerating government and being able to create a society where, we are running and we are sprinting and we are making action without having those 20-pound boots, strapped onto us, slowing us down.
Thank you. That was very insightful. I do think that we're quite often misaligned with what our government is doing, and we're like holding our heads in our hands and just saying like, what is going on around us? And it so happens that like the top 1% tends to be the one that's in control of everything that's going on. We're not going to go into that soapbox moment for me. So I'm going to go on to Noureen. What do you think about what motivates you?
Sure. So I think what motivates me is the fact that the next generation will have it easier than when we did. I think a lot about how my mom, she grew up in Egypt, really had little to nothing, grew up very poor, became the valedictorian of a 12,000 person class, first woman to be valedictorian at the largest, college in the Middle East, was able to bring her kids here. I grew up as a 504 Esau farm student, disabled, a bunch of stuff, and was able to become a student member of the State Board of Education despite a lot of barriers, was able to become president of Young Dems. And it is just really my hope that the next generation has it easier than we did. I know when I was, and I haven't told anyone the story yet, but when I was student member of the board, there was this one like 12-year-old that I became really close with because he would always tell me about things like he wanted to change in his school and all this stuff. And I drove like 2.5 hours to do a school visit. And he showed me all around his school. And like towards the end of it, he had told me like, Noureen, no one else except for my parents, you're the only person who really believes in me. And I was like, really? Like, you think like, I had some type of impact on you? And I'm like, well, like I had, similar disabilities and challenges that you did. Like, there are ways that you can overcome them, and, empowering this next generation and hopefully giving them an opportunity where it's, they live in a more equitable world, a more just world, ones where their voices are listened to. That's really just something that motivates me a lot. And thinking about like this next generation of young folks who will grow up and all the challenges that we've stated here today, hopefully they won't have them. Hopefully one day this generation, Gen Z, will be the elected officials, and we'll remember the times that we were marginalized and put down, and we'll give the next generation the opportunity to really have a voice in this work and to be heard. So those are the things that give me hope, sort of what the future has for the next generation, and how this generation will shape the political landscape.
That is indeed very hopeful. In order for us to, hopefully as we do this work, they won't have to do the same amount of effort and work into it. They'll just have to, fill out a form maybe and not have to do this much work, or be disappointed so many times. Sarah, what would you have to say about this?
I was also going to talk about the people younger than us, just as Noureen was just saying. So to piggyback off of that, I had a discussion, and I was talking to a bunch of Girl Scouts about the work I do, the work HoCo for Justice does, the work they can do, and just their thoughts and their conversations and their ideas were so inspiring. And they have new ideas. They have experiences being so young in this time. And it was just really amazing and inspiring, and their innocence, I guess, also was inspiring. And I don't want them to lose that because of all the issues that we are having right now. And also just like my peers, my classmates, and the discussions we have in class. And I think about one of my classes where something my professor noted on the first day was the fact that there's all women and only 2 men. And she was talking about how in the past it would be all men, and her as a professor, as a political science professor, wouldn't even be possible. So just the change that we see in that, and how inspiring other people are and young people are, is really what keeps me going.
Well, I want to thank you all so much for talking with us tonight, for sharing your stories and your perspectives. You all could be anywhere tonight, and you are here with us, so we really appreciate it. We want to make sure that we remind everyone that to come back on Saturday at 10 a.m. for our first policy session. And we want to go ahead and we will start our Q&A.